When I walked into my daughter's sweet 16 birthday party carrying the DNA test results, I never imagined I'd be destroying 2 marriages and shattering 3 families before the cake was even cut. But as I approached my husband Gavin and my brother Spencer laughing together by the punch bowl, I knew there was no turning back. "Happy birthday to Gracie," I said quietly, placing the manila envelope between them, "and congratulations on finally learning who her real father is." The color drained from both their faces as they stared at the official laboratory seal. Spencer's hand trembled as he reached for the document. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." While Gavin stepped back as if the envelope contained a live explosive, the party continued around us. Teenage laughter, music pumping from the speakers, the cheerful chaos of celebration, but in our little corner of the decorated backyard, time had stopped completely. "Olive, what is this?" Gavin whispered, though we all knew exactly what it was. His voice carried that desperate edge of a man, hoping against hope that his worst nightmare wasn't about to come true. I watched my brother Spencer's face transform as he read the results. 15 years of carefully guarded secrets were crashing down around us, and there was nowhere left to hide. The laboratory's clinical language was brutally clear. The alleged father, Gavin Mitchell, is excluded as the biological father of the tested child. However, the secondary sample shows a 99.7% probability of paternity. "How long have you known?" Spencer asked, his voice barely audible above the party noise. Our eyes met, and I saw the exact moment he realized that I knew everything, not just about Gracie's paternity, but about the web of lies that had defined our family for over a decade. "Long enough," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Long enough to understand why my daughter has your eyes, your laugh, your artistic talent. Long enough to figure out why she never seemed to connect with the man she calls dad. Long enough to realize that every family gathering, every holiday, every birthday party has been built on the biggest lie imaginable." Gavin was still staring at the paper, reading and rereading the results, as if the words might somehow rearrange themselves into a different truth. His successful real estate empire, his perfect family image, his role as the devoted father, everything was crumbling in real time. "The night of Mom's funeral," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "When you came over to comfort me while Gavin was stuck at that emergency closing. When we both drank too much wine and made the worst mistake of our lives. Except it wasn't really a mistake for you, was it, Spencer? You'd been planning it." The accusation hung in the air between us like smoke. I could see neighbors starting to glance our way, sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. Mrs. Patterson from next door was helping herself to punch just a few feet away, completely oblivious to the family implosion happening right beside her. Spencer's wife Tamara appeared at his elbow, her face bright with party excitement. "What are you 3 plotting over here? You look so serious." Her smile faltered as she noticed the expressions on our faces, the manila envelope clutched in Spencer's white-knuckled grip. "Tamara," I said gently, "you need to see this too. You deserve to know the truth about your husband, about why he's been so invested in Gracie's life all these years, about why he insisted on being her godfather, why he never missed a single school play or soccer game, why he set up that college fund for her when she was just 2 years old." Tamara's confusion was genuine and heartbreaking. She looked between Spencer and me, then at Gavin's devastated expression, trying to piece together a puzzle she didn't even know existed. "What truth, Spencer? What is she talking about?" Before Spencer could answer, Gracie herself bounded over, her birthday tiara slightly askew, her face glowing with 16-year-old joy. "Mom, Dad, Uncle Spencer, come on, everyone's waiting for the cake, and Uncle Spencer, thank you again for the art supplies, they're exactly what I wanted." The irony was crushing. Here was my daughter, thanking the man who was actually her biological father, for understanding her artistic passion better than anyone else, including her legal father, who'd never quite grasped her creative soul. She had Spencer's artistic eye, his way of seeing beauty in unexpected places, his ability to capture emotion in simple sketches. All the signs had been there for years, and I'd been too trusting, too naive, too committed to preserving our perfect family image to see them. "In a minute, sweetheart," I managed to say. We just need to finish an important conversation. But Gracie's presence had shifted something in the air. This wasn't just about the adults anymore. This was about a teenager who was about to learn that everything she believed about her identity was wrong. This was about a girl who would have to reconcile the father who raised her with the biological father, who'd been hiding in plain sight as her beloved uncle. Gavin finally looked up from the DNA results, his eyes meeting mine for the first time since I'd approached them. "How could you do this here, at her party, in front of everyone?" "Because I'm tired of protecting everyone else's feelings while living in a lie," I replied. "Because Spencer has had 15 years to tell the truth, and chose silence instead. Because you've spent 15 years wondering why you don't feel the connection with Gracie that other fathers describe, and you deserve to know why." The weight of the moment settled over all of us. Across the yard I could see my parents chatting with Gavin's mother, both families blissfully unaware that their carefully constructed world was about to implode. I could see Gracie's friends gathered around the gift table, innocent teenagers who had no idea they were witnessing the beginning of one of the most devastating family revelations imaginable. This was the moment I'd been building toward for months, ever since that routine blood test had sparked the first question, ever since I'd started noticing the similarities I'd been blind to for years, ever since I'd finally gathered the courage to seek the truth that would destroy us all. But it was also the moment when I finally stopped being the woman who kept everyone else's secrets, and became the woman who demanded honesty, no matter the cost. The DNA test in Spencer's trembling hands wasn't just proof of Gracie's paternity, it was evidence of 15 years of deception, manipulation, and betrayal that went far deeper than anyone at this cheerful birthday party could possibly imagine. What they didn't know yet was that this was only the beginning. The test results were just the tip of an iceberg that would sink everything we'd all believed about our family, our relationships, and ourselves. But let me take you back to the beginning, before the lies unraveled, before the truth destroyed everything. 6 months earlier, if you had asked anyone in Millbrook Heights about the Hartwell family, they would have painted you a picture of suburban perfection that belonged in a magazine spread. My name is Olive Hartwell, and I thought I had won the lottery of life. At 38, I was married to Gavin Hartwell, one of the most successful commercial real estate developers in our state. Our colonial-style home sat on 3 perfectly manicured acres in the most exclusive neighborhood in town, complete with a swimming pool, tennis court, and the kind of landscaping that required a full-time gardener. Gavin was everything a woman was supposed to want in a husband. Tall, distinguished, with salt and pepper hair that made him look like a CEO from Central Casting. He drove a black BMW, wore custom-tailored suits, and had the kind of quiet confidence that came from never having failed at anything important. His business, Hartwell Development Group, had transformed our small city's skyline with luxury condominiums and upscale shopping centers. The local newspaper had featured him on their cover twice, calling him the man building tomorrow's Millbrook. We'd met when I was 21, fresh out of college with a degree in interior design that I'd never really used. Gavin was 25 then, just starting his real estate career, full of ambitious dreams and 5-year plans. I fell for his determination, his unwavering belief that hard work could create any life you wanted. He made me feel safe, protected, like I could build something beautiful and lasting with him. Our wedding was featured in the society pages, 300 guests, an outdoor ceremony at the Millbrook Country Club, and a reception that people still talked about 15 years later. I wore my grandmother's pearl necklace and carried white roses from my mother's garden. Gavin's best man was his business partner Miles Richardson, and my maid of honor was my college roommate Edith, who flew in from California. Everything was perfect, exactly as we'd planned. The early years of our marriage were a whirlwind of success and growth. Gavin's business expanded rapidly, and we moved from a modest starter home to increasingly impressive properties. I threw myself into being the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties for his clients, organizing charity fundraisers for the hospital auxiliary, maintaining our home like a showcase property. I had a housekeeper, a personal trainer, and a calendar filled with garden club meetings and volunteer committees. But the one thing that eluded us was the family we'd always planned to have. Month after month, year after year, we tried to conceive. We underwent every test, tried every treatment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Followed every piece of advice from a growing team of fertility specialists. The failures were crushing, each negative pregnancy test a small death that chipped away at our carefully constructed happiness. Gavin handled the fertility struggles the way he handled every challenge, with research, specialists, and an unwavering belief that the right strategy would eventually succeed. He approached our baby-making efforts like a business plan, tracking ovulation cycles, scheduling intimate moments, turning our bedroom into a clinical environment focused on one singular goal. "We just need to be patient," he would say, after each disappointment, his hand briefly touching my shoulder before he returned to his laptop or newspaper. "The doctors say there's no medical reason it shouldn't happen." But I could see the frustration in his eyes, the way he'd look at his business partner Miles, who had 3 children, with something that looked almost like envy. The isolation of infertility was something I hadn't expected. While our friends were filling their homes with cribs and car seats, I was filling mine with expensive art and frequent renovations. I threw myself into decorating projects with an almost manic energy, as if creating the perfect environment might somehow manifest the family we couldn't conceive. It was during this time that my relationship with my brother Spencer became even more important to me. Spencer was 2 years older than me, an art teacher at the local high school who had inherited our father's creative soul and our mother's gentle nature. Where Gavin was all sharp angles and ambitious energy, Spencer was soft around the edges, with kind eyes and hands that were always stained with paint or charcoal. Spencer had married his college sweetheart, Tamara, a kindergarten teacher with an infectious laugh and an unlimited capacity for nurturing other people's children. They lived in a cozy craftsman-style house just 15 minutes away, filled with Spencer's artwork and Tamara's collection of children's books. Their home always smelled like vanilla candles and fresh bread, and their kitchen table was perpetually covered with art projects or lesson plans. The cruel irony was that Spencer and Tamara were also struggling with infertility, though they handled it very differently than Gavin and I did. Where we had become clinical and strategic, they had become closer, supporting each other through each disappointment, with the kind of emotional intimacy that I envied but couldn't seem to replicate in my own marriage. Spencer would come over on weekends, ostensibly to help Gavin with yard work or home improvement projects, but really to check on me. He seemed to understand my grief in a way that Gavin couldn't or wouldn't. Where Gavin offered solutions and timelines, Spencer offered presence and understanding. "It's okay to be sad about this," Spencer told me one afternoon as we sat by the pool while Gavin was at the office. "You don't have to be strong all the time." It was such a simple statement, but it was the first time in months that anyone had given me permission to feel what I was actually feeling. Our parents, Adam and Helen Morrison, lived in the same town where Spencer and I had grown up, about an hour away. Dad was a retired bank manager, and Mom was a former elementary school principal, and they represented the kind of solid, dependable love that had shaped both Spencer and me. They visited regularly, always careful not to ask about grandchildren, but clearly hoping for news they could celebrate. Sunday dinners at our house became a tradition. Mom would bring her famous apple pie, Dad would argue politics with Gavin while watching football, and Spencer would help me in the kitchen while Tamara played piano in our living room. These gatherings were the highlight of my week, the time when our house truly felt like a home rather than a beautiful museum. Looking back now, I can see how those Sunday dinners were where the foundation for our family's destruction was quietly being laid. Spencer's attentiveness to me, his easy comfort in our home, the way he seemed to understand my moods better than my own husband did. At the time I interpreted it as the natural closeness between siblings who had always been each other's greatest source of support. Gavin, meanwhile, seemed increasingly distant from the family dynamics. He participated politely in our gatherings, but his mind was often elsewhere, on his next project, his next deal, his next opportunity to build something impressive. Success in business came so naturally to him that I think he was genuinely confused by our failure to conceive, as if babies were another acquisition that could be managed and achieved through the right combination of effort and expertise. Our marriage during this period wasn't unhappy exactly, but it had become something different than either of us had expected. We were partners in building a lifestyle, companions in social obligations, but the intimate connection that had brought us together was being slowly eroded by the weight of our unfulfilled expectations. I filled my days with volunteer work and decorating projects, throwing myself into charitable committees with the same intensity that Gavin brought to his business deals. I chaired the Hospital Foundation's annual gala, coordinated the country club's Christmas charity drive, and served on the board of the local arts council. My calendar was full, my contributions were valued, but increasingly, I felt like I was performing a role rather than living an authentic life. This was the backdrop against which everything that followed would unfold, a beautiful, successful, carefully constructed life that looked perfect from the outside but was slowly hollowing out from within. We had everything except the one thing we wanted most, and that absence was creating cracks in our foundation that none of us could see. What I didn't know then was that the solution to our problems was about to arrive in the most devastating way possible, and that the brother who had been my greatest source of comfort would become the architect of my family's destruction. The dynamics of our extended family were complex in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. Looking back, I can see how each person played a crucial role in the web of relationships that would eventually trap us all, but then I saw only what I wanted to see, a loving, supportive network of people who cared about each other. Spencer and Tamara had been married for 12 years, just 3 years less than Gavin and me. Their relationship had always fascinated me because it seemed so effortless compared to the carefully negotiated partnership that Gavin and I had built. Where Gavin and I scheduled our conversations around his business meetings and my committee obligations, Spencer and Tamara seemed to exist in a constant state of comfortable communication. Tamara was one of those naturally nurturing people who made everyone around her feel cared for. She had soft brown hair that she usually wore in a simple ponytail, and she favored flowing skirts and cardigans that made her look like she'd stepped out of a children's book illustration. Her kindergarten classroom was legendary among parents in town, a magical space filled with reading nooks, art stations, and the kind of creative chaos that somehow produced remarkable learning outcomes. What I found most remarkable about Tamara was her ability to mother everyone else's children while dealing with her own fertility struggles. She never showed resentment or bitterness when her classroom filled with 5-year-olds whose parents took their ability to conceive for granted. Instead, she poured all her maternal instincts into those children, becoming a second mother to dozens of kids over the years. "I get to love them all," she told me once when I asked how she managed to stay positive. "Maybe not forever, but for that precious year when they're discovering how to read and write and think about the world. That's not nothing." Spencer's relationship with his students was equally profound though different in nature. As the high school art teacher, he worked with teenagers who were trying to figure out who they were and where they belonged in the world. He had a gift for seeing potential in kids that other teachers had written off, for finding ways to connect with the angry ones, the shy ones, the ones who felt like they didn't fit anywhere else. His classroom was a sanctuary, walls covered with student artwork, classical music playing softly in the background, and Spencer moving between easels with his characteristic gentle guidance. "Art isn't about talent," he would tell his students. "It's about honesty. If you can be honest about what you see and what you feel, you can create something meaningful." The irony of that statement would later haunt me. Spencer's influence extended beyond his own students. He had started an after-school art program for middle schoolers, organized community art shows, and even taught weekend workshops for adults. His dedication to nurturing creativity in others was genuine and infectious. Gavin often joked that Spencer could probably convince anyone to pick up a paintbrush and discover hidden artistic talents. Miles Richardson, Gavin's business partner, was another key figure in our social circle. Miles was everything Gavin wasn't: loud, gregarious, the kind of man who filled every room he entered with his booming laugh and endless stories. Where Gavin approached business with methodical precision, Miles relied on charm and intuition. Somehow, their opposing styles created a partnership that had built one of the most successful development companies in the region. Miles was married to a woman named Carol, a former marketing executive who had left her career to raise their 3 children, twin boys who were now in college, and a daughter who was a senior in high school. Carol had the kind of effortless confidence that came from never having doubted her place in the world. She volunteered at the country club, organized charity events, and seemed to glide through life without ever encountering the kind of struggles that had defined my experience. The Richardson family represented everything Gavin and I thought we wanted. Their house was always filled with the chaos of family life, sports equipment scattered in the mudroom, refrigerator covered with schedules and photos, the comfortable disorder that came from actually living in a space rather than just maintaining it. Carol often tried to include me in conversations about parenting challenges and teenage drama, but there was always an awkward moment when she remembered that I didn't have children of my own to contribute to the discussion. She meant well, but her pity was almost harder to bear than outright insensitivity would have been. My parents, Adam and Helen Morrison, occupied a special place in our family ecosystem. They had been married for 42 years and represented the kind of enduring partnership that both Spencer and I aspired to create in our own marriages. Dad was a quiet man who expressed his love through practical actions, fixing things that were broken, maintaining the yard with meticulous care, remembering everyone's favorite meals and preparing them without fanfare. Mom was the emotional center of our family, the one who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who called when someone was sick, who somehow knew when you needed encouragement before you knew it yourself. She had retired from her job as an elementary school principal 5 years earlier, but she still taught occasionally, and volunteered as a literacy tutor at the local library. Both my parents adored Gavin, seeing in him the stability and success they had always wanted for their daughter. Dad respected Gavin's business acumen, and often sought his advice about investments and financial planning. Mom appreciated Gavin's polite attentiveness, and his obvious devotion to providing for me, even if she sometimes seemed to sense that something was missing in our relationship. Their love for Spencer was different but equally deep. They were proud of his teaching career and his artistic talents, but I sometimes caught them worrying about his financial future. Teachers' salaries weren't substantial, and Spencer's generous nature meant he often spent his own money on supplies for his students or materials for community art projects. "Spencer has such a good heart," Mom would say, usually while watching him help with some household project, or listen patiently to Dad's stories about the bank. "Sometimes I worry that he's too trusting, too willing to put other people's needs before his own." Looking back, I wonder if she saw something in Spencer that the rest of us missed, or if her comment was just the universal worry of a mother who wanted to protect her child from being taken advantage of. Gavin's mother, Margaret Hartwell, was a widow who lived in an elegant senior community about 30 minutes away. She was a formidable woman who had built a successful interior design business before such careers were common for women, and she had raised Gavin as a single mother after his father died in a car accident when Gavin was 12. Margaret had strong opinions about everything, and wasn't shy about sharing them. She approved of me in principle. I came from a good family, had received a proper education, and understood the social obligations that came with marrying into a family of substance. But she also made it clear that she expected me to produce grandchildren, and as the years passed without that happening, her disappointment became increasingly difficult to ignore. "In my day," she would say with pointed significance, "couples didn't wait so long to start their families. Time has a way of running out when you're not paying attention." These Sunday dinners with our combined families became the foundation of our social life, but they were also a weekly reminder of our failure to fulfill everyone's expectations. I would watch Spencer and Tamara interact with easy affection, see Miles and Carol navigate the comfortable chaos of their family life, observe my parents' quiet satisfaction with their long marriage, and feel the weight of all the ways that Gavin and I fell short of the family ideal. What I didn't understand then was how these family dynamics were creating the perfect storm for disaster. Spencer's sensitivity to my emotional needs, Tamara's deep longing for a child, Gavin's increasing emotional distance, my own growing sense of isolation, all of these elements were combining in ways that would eventually explode our carefully constructed world. The people I loved most, the family members I trusted completely, were all carrying secrets and longings that would ultimately destroy the very relationships we were all trying so hard to protect. The night that changed everything started with a phone call. It was March 15th, and I was preparing dinner when the hospital called about my mother's massive heart attack. "Mrs. Hartwell, you need to come immediately," the nurse said. Your mother is in critical condition. Spencer arrived within an hour, still in his paint-stained teaching clothes. Gavin called around 9, stuck in an emergency closing meeting. I'm so sorry, honey, but Miles really needs me here. This deal could make or break our quarter. His absence felt like abandonment. Spencer noticed immediately. There's always an important deal with Gavin, isn't there? For 3 weeks, Spencer and I managed the crisis together, while Gavin contributed what he could between business obligations. We spent long hours in waiting rooms, sharing memories and fears. Spencer became my primary emotional support. You would have been an amazing mother, Spencer told me one evening. It filled a need I didn't realize I had. Gavin never acknowledged my maternal instincts. The night Mom died, Spencer held me as I collapsed into sobs. The night before the funeral, he came to help organize the reception. Gavin was working late again. We drank wine, shared our grief, and crossed a line that would change everything forever. 6 weeks later, staring at a positive pregnancy test, the timing made paternity impossible to ignore. Gavin and I had been intimate twice during Mom's death, perfunctory encounters. But that night, with Spencer, had been passionate and unprotected. The pregnancy should have brought joy after years of trying to conceive. Instead, it brought terror. Every prenatal appointment felt like maintaining a lie. When Gracie was born, she looked nothing like Gavin. Dark hair where his baby pictures showed baldness. Different eye shape. As she grew, the similarities to Spencer became undeniable. His way of tilting her head, wrinkling her nose, studying light and shadow with artistic intensity. She's going to be an artist, Spencer said when she was 3 months old, studying her focus on a wind chime. Some traits are just undeniable. Family comments became torture. She doesn't look much like Gavin, Margaret observed. She reminds me so much of Spencer at that age, Mom said, nearly making me choke. Spencer's attention to Gracie was both wonderful and terrifying. He never missed performances, brought perfect gifts, anticipated her needs. The resemblance grew stronger yearly. His artistic eye, musical ability, mechanical aptitude. By age 10, I lived in constant anxiety, waiting for someone to notice what seemed obvious to me. The catalyst came when 15-year-old Gracie needed blood tests for persistent headaches. Dr. Martinez called with concerning results. Gracie's blood work shows genetic markers inconsistent with your family medical history, she explained. She carries markers for conditions neither of you carry, recessive traits requiring both parents to have the genes. My terror spiked. Any genetic testing would reveal Gracie's true paternity. Maybe we should get a second opinion, I said desperately. Mrs. Hartwell, these aren't lab errors. The genetic markers are very clear, Dr. Martinez replied. Gavin immediately wanted comprehensive testing. If there are genetic factors affecting Gracie's health, we need to know everything. I scheduled genetic counseling, knowing I was setting in motion events that would destroy my marriage. Janet Crawford explained they'd compare Gracie's results to both parents' genetic samples. About 2 weeks for initial results, then an additional week for comparative analysis, she said. 3 weeks until the truth would be revealed in irrefutable scientific evidence. I researched Spencer's family medical history, his grandmother's lactose intolerance, his father's medication sensitivities, all traits that would serve as evidence of his biological connection to Gracie. The die was cast. Soon everyone would learn our family was built on a lie. While waiting for results, I gathered evidence for a truth I desperately didn't want revealed. Going through photo albums with honest eyes, the similarities were undeniable. A picture from Gracie's 5th birthday showed her and Spencer with identical expressions, same eye crinkles, head tilts, mouth positions. Spencer's high school yearbook photos revealed he'd looked remarkably similar to 15-year-old Gracie. Same dark hair, thoughtful eyes, artistic intensity. Gracie's baby book showed my desperate attempts to connect her to Gavin. Gracie has Daddy's determination, I'd written. Her musical ability must come from Daddy's side. But Gavin had no musical talent. Spencer played multiple instruments with perfect pitch. I'd saved all Gracie's artwork chronologically. Compared to Spencer's portfolio, the similarity in style was unmistakable. Same understanding of light and shadow, color relationships, emotional expression. Researching genetic testing confirmed my fears. Modern tests determine paternity with 99.9% accuracy. Once the truth emerged, there would be legal ramifications, financial consequences, emotional devastation extending far beyond my marriage. I started having panic attacks, racing heart, difficulty breathing, impending doom. Every family interaction felt loaded with hidden meaning. Gavin's faith in handling whatever the tests revealed was heartbreaking. The evidence phase was ending, giving way to devastating revelation that would destroy everything I'd protected. The call came at 9:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee when my phone rang, and I knew immediately from the caller ID that this was the moment I'd been dreading for weeks. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Janet Crawford, from the Genetic Counseling Center. Could you and your husband come in this afternoon to discuss Gracie's test results?" My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "Is everything okay? Can't you just tell me over the phone?" "I prefer to discuss genetic test results in person," Janet said carefully. "There are some findings that require explanation, and I want to make sure you both understand the implications." The word implications sent a chill through me. "What kind of findings?" "I'll explain everything when you're here. Can you come in at 2 o'clock? The 4 hours between that phone call and our appointment were the longest of my life. Gavin was in back-to-back meetings and couldn't be reached, so I spent the morning pacing through our house, replaying 15 years of lies, and wondering how I was going to explain everything to him. When Gavin finally called me back around noon, his voice was distracted and businesslike. "Sorry, honey, I was in a conference call with investors." "What did the genetic counselor want?" "She wants to see us both this afternoon. She wouldn't tell me anything over the phone." "Probably just standard procedure," Gavin said, but I could hear the concern creeping into his voice. "I'll pick you up at 1:30. The drive to the Genetic Counseling Center was silent, except for the radio playing softly in the background. Gavin was focused on the road, but I could see him glancing at me occasionally, probably wondering why I looked so pale and nervous. Janet Crawford's office was designed to be calming, soft lighting, comfortable chairs, tissues strategically placed on every surface. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, and the sort of gentle demeanor that probably served her well when delivering difficult news to families. "Thank you both for coming in," she began, settling behind her desk with a thick folder. "I want to start by saying that Gracie is a healthy young woman with no genetic conditions that pose immediate health risks." The relief on Gavin's face was immediate, but I knew this was just the setup for something much worse. "However," Janet continued, "the genetic testing has revealed some unexpected findings regarding family relationships that I need to discuss with you." My mouth went completely dry. This was it. The moment when 15 years of lies would finally be exposed. Janet opened the folder and pulled out several charts covered with complex genetic data. "Gracie's genetic profile shows clear maternal inheritance from you, Mrs. Hartwell. But there are significant inconsistencies when we compare her genetic markers to those of her presumed father." Gavin leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of inconsistencies, Mr. Hartwell?" "Based on the genetic analysis, there is a 0% probability that you are Gracie's biological father." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. I watched Gavin's face transform from confusion to shock to something approaching devastation. His mouth opened and closed several times but no sound came out. "That's impossible," he finally whispered. "Olive and we were trying to conceive for years. Gracie is our daughter." Janet's voice remained gentle but firm. "I understand this is shocking news. Genetic testing is extremely accurate, and these results have been verified through multiple analyses. Mr. Hartwell, you are not Gracie's biological father." Gavin turned to look at me, his eyes searching my face for an explanation that would make sense of what we'd just heard. "Olive, how is this possible? We've never, he couldn't finish the sentence. I felt like I was drowning. The moment I'd been dreading for 15 years had finally arrived, and I had no choice but to tell him the truth that would destroy our marriage. "Gavin," I said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you, something you need to tell me." His voice was rising now, the shock giving way to anger. "My wife just told me that our daughter isn't mine, and you have something to tell me." Janet intervened diplomatically. Perhaps you'd like some privacy to discuss this? I can step out of the room. No, Gavin said firmly. I want to hear this explanation right now, in front of a witness. I took a shaky breath and began the confession I'd been rehearsing in my mind for weeks. The night before Mom's funeral, when you were working late on that emergency closing, Spencer came over to help me prepare for the reception. Gavin's face went very still. Spencer, my brother-in-law Spencer. We'd both been drinking wine, and we were both emotional about Mom's death, and I couldn't look at him anymore. It was one night, Gavin. One terrible mistake that I've regretted every day since. The silence in the room was deafening. Janet looked deeply uncomfortable, probably wishing she'd insisted on giving us privacy for this conversation. 15 years, Gavin said finally, his voice barely audible. For 15 years, I've loved that little girl, provided for her, worried about her, been proud of her accomplishments, and she's not even mine. She is yours, I said desperately. Biology doesn't change the fact that you're her father in every way that matters. You've raised her, loved her. Don't. Gavin's voice was sharp enough to cut. Don't you dare try to minimize this. You've lied to me for 15 years. You've let me believe I was raising my own child, while knowing she was actually Spencer's. Janet cleared her throat gently. I should mention that if you'd like to pursue additional genetic testing to identify the biological father, we can certainly arrange that. That won't be necessary, Gavin said coldly. I think we've heard enough to understand the situation. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I need some time to process this. Gavin, please, I said, reaching for his arm. Let me explain. Explain what, Olive? Explain how you slept with your own brother, while I was working to support our family. Explain how you've looked me in the eye every day for 15 years, knowing that our daughter was actually his. What else is there to explain? He pulled his arm away from my grasp and headed toward the door. I'll be staying at a hotel tonight. I need to figure out what this means for our marriage. What about Gracie? I called after him. She doesn't know anything about this yet. Gavin paused with his hand on the doorknob. What about Gracie? How exactly do we tell a 15-year-old girl that her entire identity has been a lie? That the man she calls dad isn't her father, and her beloved uncle actually is? He turned back to face me one last time. You created this situation, Olive. You figure out how to explain it to her. The door closed behind him with devastating finality, leaving me alone with Janet Crawford and the ruins of my family. Mrs. Hartwell, Janet said softly, would you like me to provide you with some resources for family counseling? This kind of revelation can be extremely traumatic for everyone involved. I nodded numbly, unable to speak. The secret I'd been carrying for 15 years was finally out, and the destruction was even worse than I'd imagined. Gavin's pain, his sense of betrayal, the way he'd looked at me like I was a stranger, it was everything I'd feared and more. But this was still just the beginning. I still had to tell Spencer that his secret was out. I still had to tell Tamara that her husband had betrayed their marriage. Most importantly, I still had to tell Gracie that everything she believed about her family was wrong. The genetic test results had provided the truth I'd been hiding from for 15 years. Now I had to live with the consequences of that truth, no matter how devastating they might be. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the Genetic Counseling Center for over an hour, unable to drive home to face the empty house that Gavin had left behind. The folder of test results lay on the passenger seat like a piece of evidence from a crime scene, which in many ways it was. For 15 years I had lived with the knowledge of what Spencer and I had done, but I'd managed to compartmentalize it, to push it into a dark corner of my mind where it couldn't interfere with daily life. Now with that secret exposed and official, I was forced to confront not just what had happened, but how it had shaped every single day of our family's existence since. I thought about all the times Gavin had worried about Gracie's development, wondering why she didn't share his interests in business or logical thinking. He'd attributed her artistic nature to my side of the family, never suspecting that her creativity came from an entirely different source. I remembered his confusion when she showed no aptitude for the strategic thinking that came so naturally to him, and his gentle frustration when she seemed more interested in emotion and beauty than facts and figures. She's just different from me, he'd say, with a puzzled smile. Maybe she gets that artistic temperament from your grandmother. But it wasn't my grandmother. It was Spencer, whose creative gifts had been passed directly to his daughter through genetics he'd never acknowledged. I replayed countless family moments with new understanding. Spencer's immediate emotional connection to Gracie as a baby, the way he'd held her with such tenderness that even Tamara had commented on it. His uncanny ability to predict what would make her happy, the art supplies that were always exactly what she needed, the books that perfectly matched her reading level and interests, the encouragement that seemed to come from deep understanding, rather than observational affection. All those times I'd marveled at what a wonderful Uncle Spencer was, how naturally he related to children, how much Gracie adored him. Now I understood that what I'd been witnessing wasn't just familial affection, it was the instinctive bond between a father and his daughter, operating underneath the surface of our family's constructed reality. The guilt was overwhelming, but it was accompanied by something else I hadn't expected: relief. After 15 years of carrying this secret alone, someone else finally knew. The weight of the lie had been crushing me slowly, and while the revelation was devastating, there was a strange freedom in no longer having to maintain the facade. I thought about Tamara, who was still going about her day completely unaware that her world was about to implode. She was probably in her kindergarten classroom right now, reading stories to 5-year-olds, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband had fathered a child with another woman. How do you tell someone that their marriage has been built on a lie for over a decade? Spencer would need to know that the secret was out, but I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. I could barely process my own emotions, let alone prepare for his reaction. Would he be relieved, like I was? Or would he be angry that I'd allowed the genetic testing to proceed, knowing it would expose us both? I started the car and drove home slowly, taking the long way through neighborhoods I'd known for years, but was seeing with different eyes. This was the community where I'd built my reputation as Gavin Hartwell's devoted wife, the perfect corporate spouse who supported her husband's success and raised their brilliant daughter. Now I was a woman whose marriage was falling apart because of an infidelity that had produced a child she'd been lying about for 15 years. The house felt enormous and empty when I walked through the front door. Gavin's absence was palpable, his coffee mug still in the sink from the morning, his newspaper folded on the kitchen counter, his reading glasses on the end table where he'd left them the night before. All the small evidences of a life shared, now feeling like artifacts from a relationship that might be ending. I went upstairs to our bedroom and found that Gavin had been back while I was at the genetic counselor's office. His overnight bag was gone from the closet, along with several suits and his shaving kit from the bathroom. He'd moved efficiently, taking only what he needed for a few days, as if he hadn't yet decided whether this separation would be temporary or permanent. On his nightstand, he'd left his wedding ring. The sight of that gold band sitting alone on the polished wood surface hit me harder than anything else had all day. It was such a simple gesture, but it communicated everything about how he was feeling. 15 years of marriage, reduced to a piece of jewelry left behind like evidence of a mistake. I picked up the ring and held it in my palm, remembering the day he'd placed it on my finger. We'd been so young, so certain that love and commitment were enough to build a lasting partnership. Neither of us had imagined that we'd someday be sitting in a genetic counselor's office, learning that our family was based on a fundamental deception. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Gavin. "Please don't contact me tonight. I need time to think." No anger in the message, no accusations or demands for further explanations. Just a simple request for space from a man whose world had been shattered by genetic test results that should have been routine. I realized I was crying, not the dramatic sobs I'd expected, but quiet tears that seemed to come from a place deeper than conscious emotion. I was grieving the end of my marriage, but I was also grieving the end of Gracie's childhood innocence, the end of our family's peace, the end of Spencer and Tamara's happiness. The ripple effects of one night 15 years ago were finally reaching their full scope, and the destruction was more complete than I'd ever imagined. I thought about calling my father for support, but realized I couldn't explain the situation without revealing secrets that would devastate him too. Dad had always been so proud of our family, so happy that his children had found stable, loving marriages. How could I tell him that both his daughter and his son had betrayed their spouses in the worst possible way? Instead, I sat alone in the kitchen where Spencer and I had crossed that irreversible line, surrounded by the remnants of a life that was disintegrating around me. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a museum of my failures, every room holding memories of moments when I could have told the truth, but chose deception instead. Tomorrow, I would have to tell Gracie that her father wasn't her father. I would have to tell Spencer that our secret was exposed. I would have to tell Tamara that her husband had betrayed their marriage. I would have to face the legal, financial and emotional consequences of 15 years of lies. But tonight I sat alone with the truth, finally free from the burden of carrying it in secret, but devastated by the price that freedom had cost everyone I loved. The genetic test results had given us medical clarity about Gracie's health, but they had also destroyed the foundation of trust that held our family together. Now I had to figure out how to rebuild something authentic from the ruins of our beautiful lie. I called Spencer the next morning from my empty kitchen, my hands trembling as I dialed the number I'd known by heart for 38 years. It was Friday, and he would be in his classroom preparing for the day's art lessons, probably arranging supplies and reviewing lesson plans with the same methodical care he brought to everything he did. Olive, his voice was surprised when he answered. Is everything okay? You don't usually call me at school. Spencer, I need to see you. Today, it's urgent. What's wrong? Is it Dad? Is he okay? The concern in his voice was genuine, and for a moment I felt the familiar comfort of my brother's care. But that comfort was about to be destroyed by what I had to tell him. Dad's fine. This is about something else. Something that can't wait. There was a pause, and I could hear students talking in the background. I have classes until 3, but I could meet you after that. What's this about, Olive? The genetic testing results came back yesterday. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Spencer spoke, and his voice was barely above a whisper. And, meet me at Riverside Park at 3:30, the bench by the pond where we used to feed the ducks when we were kids. Olive. 3:30, Spencer. Come alone. I hung up before he could ask more questions, before the conversation could continue in a direction that might be overheard by his students or colleagues. The last thing Spencer needed was for this revelation to become public before we could figure out how to handle it. The hours until our meeting crawled by with agonizing slowness. I cleaned the house obsessively, did 3 loads of laundry, and reorganized my closet. Anything to keep my hands busy and my mind occupied. But nothing could distract me from the conversation I was about to have with my brother. Riverside Park held so many memories from our childhood. Spencer and I had spent countless afternoons there with our parents, feeding breadcrumbs to the ducks, climbing on the playground equipment, having picnics on the grass. It seemed fitting to have this conversation in a place that represented the innocence we'd lost the night we conceived Gracie. I arrived early and sat on the bench, watching the ducks glide across the pond's surface with the kind of peaceful determination I envied. Spencer appeared at exactly 3:30, his face drawn with worry as he approached across the grass. He looked older than I remembered, as if the years of carrying our secret had aged him in ways I'd never noticed. His hair had more gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant anxiety. Olive, he said, as he sat down beside me, please tell me this isn't what I think it is. I pulled the folder of genetic test results from my purse and handed it to him without a word. I watched his face as he read through the clinical language that had destroyed my marriage the day before. 0% probability, he read aloud, his voice hollow. Gavin isn't her father. No, I said quietly. But you are. 99.7% probability of paternity. Spencer closed the folder and stared out at the pond for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with a mixture of grief and resignation. How did Gavin take it? He left me, moved out yesterday afternoon, left his wedding ring on the nightstand like it was contaminated. Spencer flinched as if I'd struck him. Olive, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. Neither did I, but it has happened. 15 years later, it's finally caught up with us. What about Gracie? Does she know? Not yet. I have to tell her this weekend. I have to explain to a 15-year-old girl that her entire identity has been built on a lie. Spencer put his head in his hands, and I could see his shoulders shaking slightly. This is going to destroy Tamara. She's been trying so hard to get pregnant, and now she's going to find out that I already have a child with another woman. When are you going to tell her? Tonight, I guess. I can't keep this secret from her any longer, especially now that it's going to come out anyway. He looked up at me with tortured eyes. How do I explain this to my wife, Olive? How do I tell the woman I love that I betrayed her with my own sister-in-law? The word betrayed hung between us like an accusation, because that's what we'd done. We'd betrayed our spouses, our families, and ourselves in one night of weakness that had shaped 15 years of lies. Do you ever regret it? I asked quietly. Not just the consequences, but the act itself. Spencer was quiet for a long time, watching a mother duck lead her ducklings across the pond in a perfect line. I regret the pain it's caused everyone. I regret the lies we've had to tell, but regret Gracie's existence? How can I regret the most amazing person I've ever known? It was the first time in 15 years that Spencer had openly acknowledged his paternal feelings for Gracie, and hearing him say it out loud was both heartbreaking and oddly comforting. She's going to need you, I said. When all this comes out, when Gavin decides he can't be her father anymore, she's going to need to know that her biological father wants to be part of her life. What if Tamara leaves me? What if I lose my marriage and my job when this becomes public? Then you'll still have Gracie, and she'll need you more than ever. Spencer reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he extracted a small photograph, a picture of Gracie at her 8th birthday party, laughing as she tried to blow out candles on a cake that was too big for her breath to extinguish. I've carried this for 7 years, he said softly. Tamara thinks it's just because I'm a devoted uncle, but the truth is I couldn't bear not having her picture with me. The admission broke something open inside me. For 15 years, Spencer had been living with the knowledge that he had a daughter he couldn't claim, watching her grow up and achieve milestones he could never publicly celebrate as her father. What happens now? He asked. Now we tell our spouses the truth. We tell Gracie the truth. We face whatever consequences come from 15 years of deception. I stood up from the bench, suddenly exhausted by the weight of everything we had to do. And we try to figure out how to be a family when everything we thought we knew about ourselves has been proven wrong. Spencer stood too, and for a moment we faced each other across the chasm of revelation that had opened between us. We weren't just brother and sister anymore. We were two people who had created a child together, and spent 15 years living with that secret. Olive, he said, as I turned to leave, for what it's worth, I think you've been an incredible mother to her. Biology aside, Gracie is lucky to have you. And she's lucky to have you too, Spencer. She always has been, even when we couldn't acknowledge why. I walked away from the park knowing that the next phase of our family's destruction was about to begin. Spencer would go home and tell Tamara that their marriage was built on a lie. I would have to tell Gracie that her father wasn't her father. And somewhere across town, Gavin was probably trying to figure out whether our marriage could survive this betrayal. The confrontation with Spencer had been painful but necessary. Now the real work began, dismantling 15 years of lies and trying to build something honest from the wreckage. That same evening, while I was preparing to have the most difficult conversation of my life with Gracie, Spencer was across town facing his own moment of reckoning with Tamara. I learned later what happened in their cozy living room, where children's books and art supplies created the warm, nurturing environment they'd built together during 12 years of marriage. Spencer had come home from our meeting at the park looking like a man walking to his execution. Tamara noticed immediately. She'd always been intuitive about his moods, able to read the subtle changes in his expression that others missed. "What's wrong?" she asked, as he sat heavily on their sofa, still wearing his paint-stained teaching clothes. "You look like someone died." "In a way," Spencer said quietly, "someone has." He told her everything. The night at my house after Mom's funeral, the wine, the grief that had made them both vulnerable to a moment of weakness they couldn't take back. He told her about the pregnancy, about watching Gracie grow up knowing she was his daughter, about 15 years of loving a child he could never claim. Tamara's reaction was not what Spencer had expected. Instead of screaming or crying or demanding that he leave, she sat in complete silence for nearly 10 minutes, processing information that recontextualized their entire marriage. "I knew," she finally said, her voice barely audible. Spencer stared at her in shock. "What do you mean you knew?" "Not consciously, but I always wondered why you were so attached to Gracie, why you seemed to understand her in ways that even Gavin didn't. And she looks nothing like him, Spencer. Nothing at all." Tamara stood up and walked to their mantel, where family photos documented years of holiday gatherings and birthday parties. She picked up a picture from Gracie's 10th birthday party, studying it with new eyes. "I used to tell myself I was being paranoid, that my fertility struggles were making me see things that weren't there. But look at this photo, Spencer. Really look at it." She handed him the picture, and Spencer saw what Tamara had been seeing for years, the unmistakable resemblance between himself and the little girl he'd been watching grow up from afar. "I convinced myself I was imagining it," Tamara continued, tears finally starting to fall. "I told myself that childless women sometimes project parental relationships where they don't exist. But deep down, I think I always knew." The conversation that followed was unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. They talked until 3 in the morning, working through 15 years of unspoken suspicions, unacknowledged resentments, and the strange relief that comes when a terrible truth is finally acknowledged. Meanwhile, across town, I was facing my own revelations about who had known what, and for how long. After Spencer left the park, I'd driven to Dad's house, knowing I needed to prepare him for what was about to become public knowledge about our family. I found him in his workshop behind the house, refinishing an antique chair with the same methodical patience he brought to everything. At 72, Dad was still strong and sharp, but I could see how Mom's death had aged him in ways that went beyond simple grief. "Olive," he said, looking up from his sandpaper with surprise. "This is unexpected. Everything okay?" I sat down on his workbench, surrounded by the tools and wood shavings that had been part of his retirement happiness. "Dad, I need to tell you something that's going to be very difficult to hear." His face immediately grew serious. "Is it Gracie? Is she sick?" "No, Dad. Gracie's healthy. But the genetic testing we did revealed something that's going to change our family." I told him everything, watching his face transform from confusion to shock to something that looked almost like relief. When I finished, he set down his sandpaper and sat heavily on a wooden stool. "Your mother knew," he said quietly. "What?" "Not the details, maybe not even consciously, but she suspected something wasn't right about Gracie's paternity. She used to comment on how different Gracie was from Gavin, how much she reminded her of Spencer at that age." Dad looked out the workshop window toward the house where he and Mom had raised Spencer and me. "The last few years, your mother started asking me questions about the timing of Gracie's conception, about whether I remembered exactly when Spencer and Tamara had visited during that period. She never said anything to me. She wouldn't have. Your mother believed in protecting people's privacy, even when she suspected they were keeping secrets. But I could see her putting pieces together, especially after Spencer became so involved in Gracie's life. The revelation that Mom might have known, or at least suspected, added another layer of complexity to an already devastating situation. Had she carried her own secret about our family's true dynamics? Had she died knowing that her daughter and son had betrayed their spouses, but chosen to protect us by staying silent? "What happens now?" Dad asked, echoing Spencer's question from earlier. "Now, I have to tell Gracie, and Gavin has to decide if he can forgive me, if we can rebuild our marriage from this." Dad stood up and pulled me into a hug that smelled like wood stain and the cologne he'd worn for as long as I could remember. "Your mother always said that families survive by choosing love over pride. Whatever happens with Gavin, remember that Gracie is going to need both her parents, all of them." That evening, I called Gavin at his hotel. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting for my call. "I told Spencer today," I said without preamble, "and I'm telling Gracie tomorrow." How did Spencer react? Like a man who's been carrying a secret for 15 years and is finally free to acknowledge his daughter. There was a long pause. "His daughter," Gavin repeated quietly. "I keep forgetting that's what she is now. Not mine anymore." "Gavin, you raised her. You loved her. Biology doesn't erase 15 years of being her father, doesn't it? Every time I look at her now, I'm going to remember that she's not actually mine. That while I was building my business to provide for our family, you and Spencer were creating a family I didn't even know existed. The pain in his voice was raw and immediate. I need more time, he said finally. I don't know if I can get past this, Olive. I don't know if I can look at you or Spencer, or even Gracie without remembering how betrayed I feel right now. So what does that mean for us? I don't know yet. I honestly don't know. He hung up without saying goodbye, leaving me alone in the house that had once felt like a sanctuary, but now felt like a crime scene. Tomorrow I would have to tell Gracie that everything she believed about her identity was wrong, and after that, we would all have to figure out how to be a family when the foundation we'd built everything on had turned out to be quicksand. The circle of truth was expanding, and with each person who learned the real story of Gracie's parentage, the complexity of our situation grew exponentially. What had started as a secret between Spencer and me had become a family-wide crisis that would require everyone to reevaluate their relationships, their assumptions, and their capacity for forgiveness. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the weather matching my emotional state as I prepared for the conversation that would change Gracie's life forever. She was still asleep upstairs, probably exhausted from a week of school and blissfully unaware that her world was about to be turned upside down. I'd spent most of the night planning how to tell her, rehearsing different approaches, and trying to anticipate her questions. How do you explain to a 15-year-old that her father isn't her father? How do you prepare a teenager for the fact that her beloved Uncle Spencer is actually her biological parent? There was no guidebook for this kind of revelation. My phone rang at 8 a.m. It was Spencer, and his voice sounded as strained as I felt. Olive, we need to talk before you tell Gracie. Tamara and I have been up all night discussing this, and we think there might be a better way to handle it. What do you mean? Can you meet us for coffee? The diner on Maple Street, in an hour? I agreed, partly because I was desperate for any guidance on how to navigate this impossible situation, and partly because I was terrified of having the conversation with Gracie alone. The diner was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few early morning regulars reading newspapers and drinking coffee. Spencer and Tamara were sitting in a corner booth, looking like they'd been through an emotional war zone. Tamara's eyes were red from crying, but there was something in her expression that looked almost like relief. Thank you for coming, Tamara said as I slid into the booth across from them. I know this is incredibly difficult for everyone. Spencer reached across the table and briefly touched my hand. Tamara had some insights last night that I think you should hear. Tamara took a shaky breath before speaking. I've been thinking about Gracie, about how this revelation is going to affect her. She's 15, which means she's already dealing with identity questions that are normal for teenagers. Adding this level of family upheaval could be devastating. I nodded, appreciating that Tamara was thinking about Gracie's well-being despite her own pain. But, Tamara continued, I also think Gracie is stronger than we give her credit for, and she has a right to know the truth about her parentage, especially now that it's going to come out anyway. Spencer leaned forward. We've been discussing the possibility of telling her together, all of us, you, me, and Tamara, maybe even Gavin, if he's willing. The idea hadn't occurred to me, but it made sense. Gracie was going to need support from everyone who loved her, and presenting a united front might help her process the information more effectively. What about Gavin? I asked. He's not exactly speaking to any of us right now. I called him this morning, Spencer said quietly. We had a very difficult conversation, but he agreed to be part of telling Gracie. He said that whatever his feelings about us, she doesn't deserve to be punished for our mistakes. The fact that Gavin was willing to participate gave me hope that maybe, eventually, we could find a way through this crisis that protected Gracie even if it destroyed our marriages. There's something else, Tamara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Spencer and I have decided that we want to be part of Gracie's life moving forward, not to replace you or Gavin, but to give her the support she's going to need. I felt tears starting to fall. Tamara, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to hurt you. I know, she replied, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. And I'm angry, and hurt, and I don't know if Spencer and I can rebuild our marriage from this. But Gracie is innocent in all of this, and she's going to need all the love and support we can give her. We spent the next hour planning how to approach the conversation with Gracie. Spencer suggested we meet at his and Tamara's house, which felt more neutral than my home where Gavin's absence would be obvious. Tamara recommended that we have the conversation in their living room, surrounded by comfortable furniture and familiar surroundings that might help Gracie feel safe. We need to be honest but gentle, I said. She needs to understand that this doesn't change how much we all love her. And we need to be prepared for any reaction, Spencer added. Anger, confusion, tears. She might need time to process before she's ready to ask questions. Gavin arrived at Spencer and Tamara's house at 2 p.m., looking haggard but determined. The tension between him and Spencer was palpable, but both men seemed committed to putting their personal feelings aside for Gracie's sake. "Where is she?" Gavin asked, his voice carefully neutral. "She'll be here in a few minutes," I replied. I told her we had something important to discuss as a family. When Gracie arrived, she immediately sensed that something was wrong. Her artistic intuition, inherited from Spencer, made her particularly sensitive to emotional undercurrents. "What's going on?" she asked, looking around at our serious faces. "Did someone else die?" "No, sweetheart," I said, guiding her to the center of the sofa where she'd be surrounded by all of us. "But we do have something very important to tell you." She sat down slowly, her eyes moving from face to face, trying to read the situation. "This is about the genetic testing, isn't it?" I was surprised by her perceptiveness. "How did you know?" "Because Dad's been staying at a hotel for 2 days, and Uncle Spencer looks like he's been crying, and Aunt Tamara keeps staring at me like I'm going to break." She looked directly at me. "Just tell me, Mom. Whatever it is, just tell me." So I did. With Gavin holding one of her hands and Spencer sitting nearby, with Tamara providing gentle support and all of us united in our love for her. Despite the chaos of our adult relationships, I told Gracie the truth about her parentage. I explained about the night Spencer and I had made a terrible mistake while we were grieving Mom's death. I told her about the genetic testing that had revealed the truth we'd been hiding for 15 years. I explained that Gavin was still her father in every way that mattered, but that Spencer was her biological parent. Gracie listened to everything without interrupting, her face cycling through expressions of confusion, shock, and something that might have been understanding. When I finished, she sat in silence for several minutes, while we all waited for her reaction. Finally, she looked up at Spencer with tears in her eyes. "So you're really my dad?" "Biologically, yes," Spencer said softly. "But Gavin raised you, loved you, provided for you. He's your father too." Gracie turned to Gavin. "Are you going to stop being my dad now?" "Never," Gavin said firmly, and for the first time since the revelation, his voice carried absolute certainty. "You're my daughter, Gracie. DNA doesn't change that." The conversation that followed was unlike anything any of us had experienced. Gracie asked questions, expressed anger at the lies we'd told, cried about the complexity of her new reality, and ultimately demonstrated a maturity that surprised us all. "I need time to figure out what this means," she said finally. "But I want you all to know that I love you, and I don't want our family to fall apart because of this." As we planned the next steps, how to tell our extended family and friends, how to handle the legal implications, how to rebuild trust and relationships that had been shattered by 15 years of deception, I realized that Gracie's wisdom would be essential to our healing process. The planning phase was ending, and the real work of rebuilding our family was about to begin. Gracie's 16th birthday was 3 weeks away, when she made the decision that would force our private family crisis into the public eye. She'd been processing the truth about her parentage with remarkable maturity, attending family therapy sessions, and working through her feelings with the counselor we'd found who specialized in family secrets and identity issues. But teenagers, even mature ones, sometimes make impulsive decisions when they're trying to assert control over situations that feel overwhelming. And Gracie's decision was bigger than any of us could have anticipated. "I want to have my birthday party," she announced, during one of our family meetings at the therapist's office. "A big one, and I want to invite everyone, Grandpa Gavin's mom, all our family friends, everyone who's been part of my life." Spencer looked concerned. "Gracie, are you sure you're ready for that? A lot of people are going to have questions about why your dad and mom aren't living together anymore." "Let them have questions," Gracie said, with the kind of fierce determination I recognized from both Spencer and myself. I'm tired of feeling like I'm something to be ashamed of. I'm tired of everyone tiptoeing around the truth like it's going to break me. Gavin, who had been attending these sessions despite the pain it caused him to be in the same room with Spencer and me, leaned forward in his chair. What exactly are you proposing, sweetheart? Gracie took a deep breath, and I could see her gathering courage for what she was about to say. I want to tell everyone the truth, at my party. I want to stop living in this weird limbo where some people know and others don't, where everyone's whispering and wondering but nobody's talking openly. The silence in the therapist's office was deafening. Dr. Patricia Santos, our counselor, had been helping us navigate this crisis for 3 weeks, but even she looked surprised by Gracie's proposal. Gracie, I said carefully, that's a very big decision. Once you tell people publicly, you can't take it back.
Good,
She replied firmly.
I don't want to take it back. This is my life, and I want to own it instead of hiding from it.
Tamara, who had been quietly supportive throughout this entire process despite her own pain, spoke up. What would you want to say? Exactly. How would you tell people?
I'd tell them the truth.
That genetic testing revealed that Spencer is my biological father, but that Gavin raised me and will always be my dad too, that families can be complicated and still be filled with love, that I'm not ashamed of who I am or where I came from. The conviction in her voice was unmistakable. She'd clearly been thinking about this for weeks, planning how she wanted to handle the revelation. Spencer looked at his daughter, and it was remarkable how natural that word had become, with obvious pride and concern. Are you prepared for how people might react? Some of them might not understand, some might judge us all pretty harshly. Then those aren't the kind of people I want in my life anyway.
Gracie said simply.
Over the next 2 weeks, we planned what would become known in our family as the birthday party that changed everything. Gracie insisted on handling the invitations herself, calling or texting everyone personally to invite them to what she described as a very special celebration where I have something important to share. The RSVPs came back with surprising enthusiasm. Our extended family, Gavin's business associates, neighbors, school friends, Spencer's teaching colleagues, everyone seemed intrigued by the mysterious nature of the invitation. Margaret, Gavin's mother, called me directly. Olive, what is this child planning? She sounded so serious on the phone, almost formal. She has something she wants to share with everyone, I said, sticking to the agreed-upon response. Something important about our family. Is this about you and Gavin separating? Because honestly, dear, if you think a birthday party is the appropriate venue for announcing a divorce, it's not about divorce, Margaret. You'll understand when you hear what Gracie has to say. Miles Richardson, Gavin's business partner, was more direct when he cornered Gavin at the office. What the hell is going on, Gavin? Carol's convinced Gracie's pregnant or something equally dramatic. And why are you staying at a hotel? Are you having a midlife crisis? Gavin had perfected a response that was technically truthful while revealing nothing. Gracie discovered something about our family through genetic testing, and she wants to share it with everyone at once, rather than having individual conversations. The day of the party arrived with perfect spring weather, sunny and warm, ideal for the backyard celebration Gracie had planned. She'd insisted on handling all the decorations herself, creating an artistic arrangement of balloons and flowers that reflected her creative sensibilities. By 3 p.m., our backyard was filled with 60 people representing every aspect of our family's life over the past 16 years. Dad was there, looking nervous but supportive. Margaret held court near the punch bowl, clearly fishing for anyone who would talk to her. Miles and Carol Richardson chatted with Spencer's teaching colleagues, everyone trying to piece together why this birthday party felt so significant. Gracie had asked me to introduce her, which felt appropriate since I was the one who had created this situation in the first place. At 4 p.m., I called for everyone's attention. Thank you all for coming to celebrate Gracie's 16th birthday. I began, my voice surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. Before we sing happy birthday, Gracie has something she'd like to share with all of you. Gracie stepped forward, wearing a sundress she'd chosen specifically for this moment, something that made her look mature and confident. Spencer stood on one side of her, Gavin on the other, and Tamara and I flanked them, presenting a united front, despite the complexity of our relationships. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," Gracie began, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "You've all been part of my life in different ways, and it means everything to me that you're here for this moment." She paused, looking around at the faces of people who had known her since she was a baby, people who had celebrated every birthday and milestone with our family. "A few weeks ago, I had some genetic testing done for medical reasons, and the results revealed something unexpected about my family, something that my mom and Uncle Spencer have been keeping secret for 16 years. I could see people leaning forward, sensing that something significant was about to be revealed. The testing showed that Gavin, my dad, isn't my biological father. Spencer is." The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. 60 people processing information that recontextualized 16 years of family relationships, birthday parties, holiday gatherings, and casual interactions. Then Margaret's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "What exactly are you saying, child?" Gracie looked directly at her grandmother, her voice steady and clear. "I'm saying that my mom and Spencer conceived me during a difficult time in both their marriages, that Gavin has been my father in every way that matters, but that Spencer is my biological parent, and that I'm proud to have so many people who love me, even when the situation is complicated." The explosion of conversation that followed was immediate and chaotic. Some people rushed to hug Gracie, others approached Spencer and me with expressions ranging from shock to disapproval. A few guests gathered their things and left without saying goodbye. But through it all, Gracie stood in the center of it, fielding questions and comments with the poise of someone twice her age, supported by the adults who had all chosen to put her well-being above their own discomfort. The climactic revelation was over, but the real work of rebuilding our family's public identity was just beginning. The aftermath of Gracie's announcement was like watching a social earthquake in real time. Within minutes of her revelation, our backyard had divided into distinct groups, those who rushed to offer support, those who stood frozen in shock, and those who quietly gathered their belongings and headed for the exit. Margaret was the first to recover her voice, and her reaction was exactly what I'd feared. "Olive Morrison Hartwell," she said, using my full name like an accusation, "how dare you put this family through such a scandal, and to announce it at a child's birthday party of all places?" Before I could respond, Gracie stepped between us. "Grandma Margaret, this was my decision. Nobody forced me to tell everyone. I chose to because I'm not ashamed of who I am or where I came from. You should be ashamed," Margaret snapped, her proper exterior cracking completely. "Your mother has made a mockery of our family name, and she gestured wildly toward Spencer, "your uncle, or whatever he is now, has betrayed the trust of everyone who ever respected him." Dad moved quickly to intervene, his usually gentle demeanor replaced by protective anger. "Margaret, that's enough. Whatever you think about the adults in this situation, you will not speak to my granddaughter that way." The confrontation between our family's matriarchs drew the attention of everyone still remaining at the party. I watched as people chose sides in real time, some moving closer to show support, others stepping back as if the scandal might be contagious. Miles Richardson approached Gavin with obvious concern. "Gavin, I had no idea you were dealing with this. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it's not something you tell your business partner over lunch," Gavin replied tersely. "Some things are too complicated for casual conversation." Carol Richardson, meanwhile, had cornered Spencer near the cake table. "Spencer, I don't understand. How could you, with your own sister-in-law? What about Tamara?" Spencer's face flushed red, but before he could respond, Tamara herself appeared at his side. "Carol, I appreciate your concern, but Spencer and I are handling this privately. Our marriage is our business." The loyalty Tamara showed Spencer in that moment, despite everything he'd put her through, was remarkable. Even as their own relationship hung in the balance, she refused to let him face public judgment alone. Dr. Martinez, Gracie's pediatrician, who had been invited as a family friend, approached me with professional concern. "Olive, how is Gracie processing all of this? This kind of family revelation can be traumatic for adolescents." "She's in counseling," I replied, grateful for someone who seemed focused on Gracie's well-being, rather than the scandal. We all are. She's actually handling it better than any of the adults. Some reactions surprised me completely. Mrs. Patterson, our elderly neighbor, who I'd expected to be scandalized, hugged me tightly. Dear, families have complicated stories. What matters is how much love surrounds that child. And from where I'm standing, she's surrounded by plenty, but others were less forgiving. The Hendersons, another couple from our neighborhood, gathered their teenage daughter and headed for the door without a word. Janet Morrison, a distant cousin, shook her head in obvious disapproval as she left. Some things should stay private, she muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. The most heartbreaking moment came when Gracie's friend Sarah approached her hesitantly. Gracie, does this mean you're not really who I thought you were? I'm exactly who I've always been, Gracie replied with remarkable composure. The only thing that's changed is that now you know the truth about my biology, but I'm still the same person who's been your friend for 6 years. By 6 p.m., about half the guests had left, leaving a core group of family and close friends who seemed determined to support us through this crisis. The birthday cake remained largely untouched, the decorations looking incongruously cheerful against the backdrop of family drama. Spencer found me standing alone by the garden fence, watching the remaining guests navigate awkward conversation. Olive, I'm sorry, I never wanted Gracie's birthday to turn into this kind of spectacle. She needed to do it this way, I replied. She needed to control the narrative instead of having it whispered about behind her back. What happens now? Before I could answer, Gavin joined us. The three of us standing together felt surreal. The woman, the husband, and the brother whose 15-year-old secret had just exploded in front of 60 witnesses. Now we deal with the consequences, Gavin said quietly. The gossip, the judgment, the way people look at us differently. Gracie's brave enough to face this head-on, so we need to be brave enough to support her. As the sun set on Gracie's 16th birthday party, I realized that we'd crossed a point of no return. The secret that had shaped 15 years of our family's life was now public knowledge, and there was no going back to the careful facade we'd maintained for so long. The immediate aftermath was chaotic and painful, but it was also honest in a way our family hadn't been in over a decade. For the first time since that night in my kitchen, we were all living in the same truth, facing the same reality, dealing with the same consequences. The hard work of rebuilding our relationships was just beginning, but at least now we were all starting from the same place, the complicated, messy, undeniable truth of who we really were. 6 months after Gracie's birthday revelation, I sat in the same coffee shop where Spencer and I had met to discuss the genetic test results, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. The crushing weight of secrets had been replaced by the lighter burden of rebuilding authentic relationships. Gavin had moved back home 3 weeks earlier, not because our marriage had magically healed, but because we'd both realized that Gracie needed stability while we figured out what our family would look like going forward. We were sleeping in separate bedrooms and attending couples counseling twice a week, slowly working through 15 years of broken trust. I don't know if I'll ever stop feeling betrayed, Gavin had said during one particularly difficult session, but I also can't stop loving Gracie, and she needs both her parents right now. Spencer and Tamara's journey had been different, but equally complex. They'd separated for 2 months, while Tamara decided whether she could rebuild a marriage that had been founded on such a fundamental deception. In the end, it was Gracie who helped her make the decision. Aunt Tamara, Gracie had said during one of their private conversations, I know Spencer hurt you terribly, but he's been a good father to me even when he couldn't claim me, and he's been a good husband to you even when he was carrying this secret. Maybe that counts for something. Tamara had moved back home in September, and she and Spencer were doing the slow work of rebuilding trust. More importantly, Tamara had embraced her role as Gracie's stepmother, with the same nurturing instincts she brought to her kindergarten classroom. I always wanted to be a mother, she told me recently. I just never imagined it would happen this way. The most remarkable transformation had been in Gracie herself. The burden of carrying family secrets had lifted from her shoulders, replaced by a confidence and authenticity that radiated from everything she did. Her art had become more expressive, her friendships deeper, her entire approach to life more honest. She'd started a blog about complex families and identity, writing with wisdom beyond her 16 years about the difference between biological families and chosen families, about the power of truth over comfortable lies, about the resilience that comes from facing difficult realities head-on. Some people think my family is scandal, she'd written in her most popular post. I think we're proof that love doesn't always follow traditional patterns, but it's real regardless of how it's structured. The social consequences had been mixed. Some friendships had ended, people who couldn't handle the complexity of our situation, or who felt deceived by our years of maintaining a false narrative. But other relationships had deepened, strengthened by our willingness to be vulnerable and honest. Margaret had eventually come around, though it took months of family therapy and several difficult conversations. I may not approve of how this situation came about, she told Gracie during their reconciliation, but I refuse to lose my granddaughter over the mistakes of adults. Dad had become an unexpected source of wisdom throughout our healing process. Your mother always said that families are built on love, not DNA, he reminded us regularly. Biology brought you all together in complicated ways, but choice is what keeps you together now. Spencer had legally established paternity and was contributing to Gracie's financial support, though Gavin remained her primary father figure. They'd worked out a custody arrangement that recognized both men's roles in her life, Gavin as the father who raised her, Spencer as the biological father who wanted to claim her openly. The most surprising development had been how Spencer's teaching career had actually benefited from our family's openness about complicated relationships. Parents and students seemed to appreciate his authenticity, and he'd started facilitating support groups for families dealing with similar revelations. Turns out a lot of families have secrets, he told me with a wry smile. Most people are relieved to meet someone who's willing to talk honestly about how messy real life can be. As for me, I was learning to live without the constant anxiety that had plagued me for 15 years. The relief of not carrying secrets was profound, even though it came with the price of public scrutiny and personal judgment from some corners of our community. I'd returned to my interior design career, but with a new focus on helping families create authentic homes rather than perfect showplaces. My experiences had taught me the difference between spaces that look beautiful and spaces that nurture honest relationships. The night before Gracie's 17th birthday, which she'd insisted on celebrating with a small, intimate gathering, she pulled me aside for a conversation I'll never forget. "Mom, do you regret it? The night with Spencer, I mean. Because if you hadn't made that choice, I wouldn't exist." It was a question I'd been afraid she'd ask, and one I'd been preparing to answer honestly. "I regret the pain it caused everyone," I said carefully. "I regret the lies and the years of deception, but regret you, never. You're the best thing that ever happened to our family, even if you came to us in an unconventional way." She hugged me tightly. "I'm glad you chose truth over perfection, even though it took a while." As I watched Gracie blow out 17 candles surrounded by the people who loved her, Gavin and Spencer, Tamara and me, Dad and even Margaret, I realized we'd created something unprecedented. We weren't a traditional family, but we were an honest one. We weren't perfect, but we were authentic. The DNA test that had revealed Spencer as Gracie's father had destroyed the family we thought we were, but it had also freed us to become the family we actually needed to be. Sometimes the truth breaks everything down so something better can be built from the pieces, and sometimes that's exactly what needs to happen. 2 years later, I found myself standing in the exact same spot where this entire journey had begun. The genetic counselor's office where Janet Crawford had first delivered the news that would change our lives forever. But this time I wasn't there as a patient, I was there as a volunteer, helping other families navigate the complex emotional terrain that comes with unexpected genetic revelations. "Mrs. Hartwell," Janet said as I organized informational pamphlets about family counseling resources, "I have to tell you, when I first met your family, I wasn't sure you'd all survive the revelation intact. The fact that you're here helping others shows remarkable resilience." I smiled, thinking about how far we'd all come. We almost didn't survive it, but we learned that sometimes you have to completely fall apart before you can rebuild something stronger. That morning, I'd received a text from Gracie, who was now 18 and in her freshman year at art school 3 hours away. The message included a photo of her latest painting, a complex family portrait that somehow managed to capture all of us in a single frame, biological relationships, and chosen relationships, intertwined in beautiful, honest complexity. Family Portrait #3, she'd captioned it. Still figuring out how to show love that doesn't follow traditional lines, but I think I'm getting closer. Her art had become increasingly sophisticated, earning her a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious art programs in the country. More importantly, her willingness to explore themes of identity, truth, and family complexity had resonated with audiences far beyond our small community. Last month, she'd been featured in a national magazine article about young artists addressing contemporary family dynamics. The interviewer had asked her about growing up in what they termed an unconventional family structure. "Every family is unconventional if you look closely enough," Gracie had replied. "The difference is whether you're honest about the complications, or whether you pretend they don't exist. My family chose honesty, and that made all the difference." Gavin and I had finally finalized our divorce 6 months ago, but in a way that preserved our co-parenting relationship and mutual respect. We'd realized that while we couldn't rebuild our marriage from the foundation of lies it had been built on, we could create a new kind of partnership focused on Gracie's well-being. "We may not be husband and wife anymore," Gavin had said during our final mediation session, "but we'll always be Gracie's parents. That bond doesn't change because of biology, or because of divorce papers." He'd started dating someone new, a widow named Rachel, who had 2 teenage children of her own. What I found remarkable was how naturally Gracie had accepted Rachel into her extended family constellation, recognizing that love wasn't a finite resource that needed to be carefully rationed. Spencer and Tamara had not only survived their marriage crisis, but had emerged stronger than before. They'd adopted a sibling pair, a 10-year-old boy, and his 8-year-old sister who needed a stable home. Watching Spencer embrace fatherhood officially, after years of loving Gracie from the sidelines, had been profoundly moving. "It turns out I had more capacity for love than I realized," Tamara had told me recently. "Our crisis taught me that families can expand in ways you never expect." The children they'd adopted knew the full story of Gracie's parentage, and accepted her as their older sister without question. Children, it seemed, were remarkably adaptable when adults provided honest, loving guidance. Dad had become the family historian, creating photo albums and memory books that told our story with unflinching honesty. "Future generations should know the truth about how this family came together," he'd explained. "The messy parts make the love more meaningful, not less." As for me, I'd discovered a calling I never expected. My work with families facing genetic revelations had led to speaking engagements at counseling conferences and medical schools. I'd learned that our story, while dramatic, wasn't unique. Families everywhere were grappling with unexpected paternity discoveries, genetic testing surprises, and the challenge of rebuilding relationships around new truths. "The hardest part isn't learning the truth," I'd told a room full of genetic counselors at a recent conference. "The hardest part is deciding what to do with that truth once you have it. Do you let it destroy everything you've built, or do you use it as an opportunity to build something more authentic?" That afternoon, I drove home to the house that Gavin and I had once shared, but that was now truly mine. Gracie was coming home from college for the weekend, and we'd planned a family dinner that would include Spencer, Tamara, their adopted children, Gavin, Rachel, and her kids. Even Margaret had decided to join us, having finally embraced the expanded definition of family that had emerged from our crisis. As I prepared dinner in the kitchen, where Spencer and I had crossed that fateful line 18 years ago, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. One night of weakness had created a web of lies that had shaped nearly 2 decades of our lives. But the revelation of that truth, as painful as it had ultimately freed us all to love more openly, more honestly, and more completely than we'd ever imagined possible. The DNA test that had initially seemed like a medical routine had turned out to be the catalyst for the most important transformation our family had ever experienced. We'd learned that blood doesn't determine family, choice does. We'd discovered that perfect facades often hide imperfect foundations, but authentic relationships can weather any storm. Most importantly, we'd realized that sometimes the most devastating revelations become the foundation for the most beautiful new beginnings. When Gracie walked through the front door that evening, carrying her art supplies and wearing the confident smile of someone completely comfortable with who she was, I knew we'd made the right choice in choosing truth over comfort, authenticity over perfection. Our family might not look like anyone else's, but it was undeniably, beautifully, completely ours. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.